A backlash against UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer in local and regional elections in England, Scotland and Wales. He's rejecting calls to quit, but faces new challenges from both the left and right. So, why are these elections so significant? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is under increased pressure after local elections in England and for the national parliaments in Scotland and Wales. Less than 2 years after a landslide victory swept his Labour Party to government, he's now facing calls to quit from opposition parties and even within his own Labour ranks. Starmer said he's determined to carry on. While vote counting will continue into the weekend, the election's already being described as historic. Dominance of UK politics by Labour and the Conservatives is under challenge like never before on both the left and the right. Labour is being forecast to lose power for the first time ever in Wales, with pro-independence nationalists polling strongly as in Scotland. So why is the UK government in trouble less than 2 years after sweeping to power? What are the implications? We'll talk to our guest shortly, but first, this report from Boateng.
We did it!
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, riding on a wave of optimism 2 years ago, after the Labour Party came to power in a landslide victory.
Change begins now.
Now, the picture is different.
How are you feeling, Prime Minister?
Opinion polls suggest Starmer is one of the most unpopular UK Prime Ministers of modern times. Many government MPs are worried about the impact this may have on their own political futures. Despite the pressure, Starmer insists he's staying put.
They've sent a message that the change that we promised isn't being delivered in a way they can feel, and also, frankly, they're fed up with years of the status quo. But we were elected to deal with those challenges, and I'm not going to walk away from that and to plunge the country into chaos.
Starmer promised stability, but he's been criticised for several policy U-turns, including child benefit and restoring winter fuel payments for about 9 million pensioners. Voters are also seeing the cost of living rise, with the Iran war a big factor.
Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility and go?
Yeah! And Starmer's faced a backlash over the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US. He was fired over his links to the convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. The Conservatives and Labour have dominated British politics for more than a century, but they're now facing pressure from the Reform UK party, led by Nigel Farage. It was founded after he led a successful campaign 10 years ago, winning a referendum to take Britain out of the European Union. He's been pushing a right-wing, populist, anti-immigration agenda ever since.
Would you vote for this lot or something?
Reform UK has just 8 members of Parliament, but is hoping the local elections will be a springboard for a bigger challenge in the next general elections.
It can't continue to be a fluke or a protest vote. I would honestly say you're witnessing an historic shift in British politics. This is now the most national of all parties. We're competitive in the north of Scotland. We were competitive in Cornwall in the county elections last year. We're competitive in every part of the country, and we're here to stay.
The leader of the opposition admits reform poses a threat to the dominance of the 2 biggest parties.
What we're seeing is the era of two-party politics moving into multi-party politics. There are no safe seats for any party. We all have to work hard for every vote. What will be a disaster is seeing more Labour, more Lib Dems, more Green, more Reform, because none of these people are serious.
As well as local elections in England, people in Scotland and Wales have voted for their own parliaments, with results awaited over the weekend. Labour is under severe pressure there too, from Scottish and Welsh nationalist parties who want independence from the UK. Boateng, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests now. In London, Peter Geoghegan is editor of the investigative news site Democracy for Sale. In Dundee, Scotland, Lesley Riddoch, a podcaster, journalist, and the author of Blossom, What Scotland Needs to Flourish. And in London, we have Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Tim, let me start with you today. As we heard in that report from Amma Boateng, the Conservatives and Labour have dominated British politics for more than a century. Now that we're seeing results coming in for this election, I want to ask you how fragmented politics have become in Britain and what that means going forward.
Very fragmented is the answer. We are really entering an era of five-party politics, it seems, and indeed in Scotland and Wales, six-party politics. You're seeing the two legacy parties, if you like, having their votes stolen, probably for good in some places, by a populist radical right party, Reform UK, on the one hand, and that's eating mainly into the Conservatives' vote, but not exclusively. And then on the other, the Green Party, which is eating mainly into Labour's vote, with the result that the old duopoly seems to have collapsed. We are in an era where most parties seem to be polling at or around plus or minus 20%. And that has huge implications for a country that is used to a kind of Westminster system dominated by two parties and run under a first past the post system that actually can't really cope with that kind of variety and variation.
Lesley, let me ask you, from your vantage point, how seismic a shift is what we're seeing right now, and why are these elections so significant?
Well, it is seismic. I mean, as Tim just said there, a key thing actually is the voting system is one thing. Sounds a bit boring, but it's really important. This first past the post being used at local elections in England, there's not another country anywhere that's using such an unfair voting system at local level. And it produces some pretty skewed effects, which really there's going to have to be change in that voting system to reflect the fact that people want to vote in all sorts of different ways, not just for the big two. Second thing to say is, this might be a United Kingdom in name, but by gum, it's not turning out like that in the way that people react to the same forces. So in Scotland, Reform, at the moment, they will definitely win seats here at our national devolved government level. But so far, people's protest has always been recently towards the SNP, who want independence. At the moment, actually, the other big kids on the block are the Greens, who've come in and might win their first seat in the Scottish Parliament. Meanwhile, in Wales, as Tim mentioned as well, this is really epic because Wales has voted Labour for 100 years. And it looks as if they have conceded already in Wales with only, in fact, I don't know that there's even been any seats formally declared yet because they have a new voting system. So it's all change around Great Britain, but change in different directions.
Peter, it was just 2 years ago that the Labour Party won a landslide general election victory. How could things have gone so wrong for them since then, especially for Keir Starmer?
I think we do actually have to consider the voting system. So if you look back to the landslide that Labour won in 2024, they won over 400 seats in the UK Parliament, 650 seats, a huge majority. But they did so on 33% of the vote. So in some ways, it was a very broad victory, but a very shallow one. And really, ever since then, Keir Starmer has struggled. His opinion poll ratings are really, really terrible. And they've been terrible since not long after he got into office. I think even friends of Keir Starmer admit that he's really struggled to articulate a vision for the country. He's felt like he's been kind of firefighting the whole time. He's struggled to cohere around a kind of set of clear agenda for the country. I think that's been a real challenge. He's struggled to communicate. He's struggled to get a message across. But also it's felt like Labour has constantly been firefighting. They put a lot of stock into growth. They talked a lot about economic growth. We haven't had economic growth in this country. You know, it's anemic at best. And actually the war in Iran means it's probably going to get worse rather than better. So at many levels, Labour has struggled. It pitched itself as the change party. It won on a change manifesto. And really, it was as much an anti-Conservative vote. The Conservatives have been in power for 14 years. The country was very sick of the Conservatives than it was a ringing endorsement of the Labour Party. And since then, it really has struggled to kind of get some sort of grip. And so in some ways, these results, we had local elections a year ago in many parts of England, which were in many ways just as bad for the Labour Party. So this has been coming. In some ways, it's not a surprise.
Tim, Keir Starmer did take responsibility for what he called his party's tough results in England, but he insisted that he's not going to walk away and plunge the country into chaos. How much pressure Is he going to be coming under to resign? And what do you think happens now for him?
Well, there will be people both within the parliamentary party and I suspect also in the grassroots of the Labour Party who will explicitly call for him to go. I'm not sure, however, that actually that will result in him either resigning or being challenged anytime soon. And that is because among Labour MPs, they're not really sure that there's anybody currently in the House of Commons who could actually replace Keir Starmer and make the government more popular. And to be honest, there's also quite a lot of disagreement about the strategy that any new leader would follow. How different would it be from what Keir Starmer has been doing since 2024? There are fears on the right of the Labour Party that if they elect someone too left-wing, then the bond markets will punish the government. There are fears on the left that if they elect someone too right-wing, then they will end up taking a hard line on immigration, which has alienated so many of their left liberal supporters and seen them hair off towards the Greens. So I think for all of those reasons, until perhaps the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, manages to get a seat in Parliament, you have to be in Parliament to be the leader of the Labour Party. You have to be in Parliament to be Prime Minister, obviously. There's probably going to be a stay of execution for Keir Starmer. The only caveat is if these results are as terrible as some people are predicting, of course, it may just cause panic, which will perhaps result in a challenge to Keir Starmer sooner rather than later.
Lesley, Nigel Farage called the results thus far a historic shift. I want to ask you a little bit about that. I mean, how much do you think that the gains made by Nigel Farage will improve his party's chances of a perhaps much more significant victory in the general election, which I believe has to take place by 2029?
Well, it's interesting because a veteran commentator here, Peter Kellner, has observed that, as was mentioned, there were elections last year, and actually, I think it was something like 44% of the vote in some places for reform. The average at the moment is sitting at 33%. So it's kind of slumped a little bit, which will be no consolation for the Tories or for Labour, the two legacy parties, because reform are romping home all over the place. It's also the case looking at Scotland even. They're not so far, they're not really figuring very large. But in one extraordinary result in Shetland, where the SNP have ousted the Liberals, and they have had Liberal representation since 1950 there, the Reform candidate, who apparently didn't even visit, actually got more votes than practically all the rest put together. So there's a dynamic happening here that at the moment, equally, there's lots of videos going online where people are being asked if they vote Reform, what are their policies beyond immigration? And they can't list any. So Reform are a pretty untested party, although they run some councils already in England, and there have been a lot of problems there. But a lot of the people who are voting Reform seem to be prepared to cut them a lot of slack. You've got to say the parallels with Donald Trump are strong in the sense that there's a big vote for Nigel Farage personally, and that seems to be in a way more important than policies. But these guys are going to have to pitch up and be representatives. And there's questions, I suppose, as to how dedicated they'll be, what their policies will be, how effective they'll be, and whether actually the public will ever know, because after all, we're all not sitting in parliaments watching their daily actions.
Peter, I saw you reacting there to what Lesley was saying. It looked like you wanted to jump in, so go ahead.
I think it's really interesting to see where Reform are at as well, because they are going to be the headline figure of this. And I think, Lesley referenced Peter Kellner there. I think this sense in which Labour is losing seats, council seats to Reform, but losing votes to its left to the Greens, I think is a real thing. And we're going to see more of that, I'd say, as London starts. We see more councils coming in a place like I'm talking to in East London, where the Greens have now emerged very much as a second party, if not the party that might won some of these councils. That's a big shift. So what we're seeing is this real shift into kind of 5, and in some parts of the UK, in places like Scotland and Wales, 6-party politics. I think it's interesting, if you drill down into these figures, Reform won 41% in the seats that they contested back in the council elections last year. They won around 33% this year. So that is down. And there is, I think, a sense in which this has been a good day for Nigel Farage, but possibly not quite as good as they would have hoped. Some of the results from Scotland are striking, and I think they will be from Wales as well, and suggest that Reform are going to be the second party. I was really struck that in some of the Scottish seats that have already declared the constituencies, Reform have actually outpolled Labour and are becoming the second party. That's really striking. They're clearly winning a lot of the Conservative vote. A lot of Conservative voters are coming over to Reform as well. Some of Labour voters seems to be as well. But it's a good day for Nigel Farage, but I still think it's not necessarily an absolutely fantastic day for him. They are the big story of it, but they haven't done as well as they might have expected in places like Essex. It does suggest this sense over the last few months that Reform is if not going backwards, is stalling, or there's a ceiling to it, is there. But the big proviso and the big caveat was that in a British general election, as Labour did last time, you could win 33% of the vote and win a big majority.
Tim, Peter was mentioning the Conservatives there. I wanted to get your take on that. How do you think thus far the Conservatives have been performing? How bad has the result been for the Tories, or how bad do you think it might be?
Well, Peter mentioned Essex there. They have lost control of that council to Reform. That is pretty serious because Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party leader, is an Essex MP, and there are other Conservatives who would be vulnerable to a Reform attack, as it were, in the general election. So I think they will be worried about that. They have been able to win a couple of totemic victories in London so far, in Wandsworth and in Westminster. They'll hide behind those, and they'll hide behind the fact that their losses in numerical terms pale in comparison to Labour's. But nevertheless, this is a very, very bad defeat for the Conservatives, and seems to bear out the polling, which suggests that actually they have gone backwards since 2024. There's a lot of talk about Kemi Badenoch, pulling the party up, being more popular than perhaps any other leader now. But that doesn't seem to have made very much difference to the party. They polled around 24% in the election, and they are now on 17, 18%. Any leader, I think, would have to show a little bit more progress than that. There's, I think, very little talk about Kemi Badenoch being replaced right now, but I don't think she can carry on for another year or two without actually making a big dent in Reform's polling.
Lesley, it looked to me like you were reacting to some of what Tim was saying there, that maybe you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about actually both contributions, because one thing that seems to be quite interesting is the way that cities are changing actually almost around the world. They're changing to be younger in demographics. They're more progressive. They're electing people like Zoran Mandami in New York, against all trends. Copenhagen recently lost its Social Democrat mayor for the first time in 100 years. London has seen that as well, with Sadiq Khan sitting as a Labour mayor there. And in our neck of the woods in Scotland, we're seeing a green challenge to the SNP in Edinburgh and Glasgow, which would hitherto have been just completely unthinkable. So it's kind of like the cities, many parts of the cities are changing. As Peter mentioned earlier, he's got his eye on different parts of London, which look set to elect green councils. So it's kind of like, even against really fiercely regressive voting systems like first past the post, the Greens are actually making headway, and they're doing it in cities. And that might be a trend that remains for as long as cities are peopled the way that they are.
Peter, let me ask you a little bit about what Lesley was just talking about when it comes to the Greens. There are reports saying that the Green Party may be heading to their best local election performance ever. If things do play out in that way, what does that say to you about where things are politically right now?
I think it again speaks to the vociferousness of British politics. The Greens are poised to do quite well, I'd say, in cities where they haven't, especially we have a first past the post system in England for councils. So things can swing quite quickly if you win the seat. If you win a kind of 35-40% of the vote, you can very quickly do very well. Whereas if you won 25-30%, you might get nothing. I think it shows that Labour is vulnerable. It shows again the shallowness of Labour victory. I remember talking to a former Lib Dem MP not long after Labour won in 2024, and he said something very astute, I thought to me. He said, Labour hasn't decided which seat it's willing to lose. And I think that's part of the problem for the Labour Party. It is struggling to figure out, where is it weakest? Where should we be trying to defend? Is it on its left or is it on its right? For a long time under Morgan McSweeney, they've tried to defend the right against, they've seen them as reform-facing seats. That's not really worked very well. You can see some of the challenges with that today, where they've lost wholesale in places like Hartlepool, they've lost council they've held to reform. But they're also now very vulnerable on their left against the Greens. And the Greens have very much emerged, I think, as the kind of liberal city voice to the left of the Labour Party. And they do seem quite poised to do well. And the question will be whether they can consolidate that into general election victories. So at the moment, they've only got a handful of seats, the Green Party. They won a big by-election outside Manchester a few months ago. But if they can get a foothold into councils, they will feel that this is a place where they could make gains in the next general election, which will make it even more difficult for Labour and Keir Starmer, whoever's leading the Labour Party next time, to return to government, because some of these seats that they basically weighed the votes for a very long time will be gone. And what you're seeing really is this, what Labour had for a long time, which was very safe seats, whether it was in Scotland or inner cities. For decades, they had these safe seats. They are really evaporating very quickly, and Labour will have to wake up to a reality that's just another one of our parties in a multi-party system.
Tim, I saw you nodding along a bit to what Peter was saying. It looked to me like you wanted to add to it, so go ahead.
Yeah, another thing to say, of course, is this is where Israel, Gaza, and to some extent, but to a lesser extent, Iran comes in. What the Greens have been able to do is to pick up a widespread disillusionment among the Muslim community in the UK with Keir Starmer in particular and Labour in general. And it used to be the case that the South Asian population, particularly the Muslim part of the South Asian population, were very reliable voters for Labour. That seems to have changed a great deal, and that will explain in part why they're doing quite well and why they're scheduled to do quite well in London. The other thing that I think is important to say is, although in these local elections we tend to concentrate understandably on geography of the vote, actually demography of the vote is important as well. Our other contributors have pointed to the fact that, one of the big discriminators now is age. Younger people tend to vote for the progressive left parties. Older people are tending to vote for the right-wing parties. It also depends on education. So people who left school early, perhaps at 16, tend much more to vote for Reform and for the Conservatives. Those who left school a little later, and particularly have gone to university, tend to prefer, it used to be Labour, but now seems to be in increasing levels, the Greens.
Lesley and Peter, I saw you both react when Tim was talking about the impact potentially that the war in Iran has had on this vote. So I want to ask you both about that in the remaining time. Lesley, let me ask you first. How much has the Iran war impacted how people feel about the economy, for example, right now? How much may that have played into all this?
Well, it will have done, but I must say I was nodding with reference to Gaza and Palestine because Scots particularly have been, I've been out on marches during the period when you could have been arrested for saying the words Palestine and action in the same sentence. We've watched ludicrous situations where 85-year-old priests are being carried away for simply saying what is widely known, that there is a genocide happening committed by Israel. And when you see that being clamped down on by a Labour government, it is quite jaw-dropping to a lot of people, and has really it might even cause an upset for the SNP, where one minister who had talks even with a deputy ambassador from Israel may well lose his seat to a Green. So everyone brushes this under the carpet, but for people who care about this, and going back to the demographics, that's young voters in cities, they really care. And the last wee thing I wanted to say is the big thing that could happen is that Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland could soon have the largest party being a nationalist party that wants essentially to break up the UK. Northern Ireland's not voting today, but it has a Sinn Féin First Minister who want to reunite with Ireland. So you can ignore Scotland getting a pro-independence majority, and it's been ignored 4 times already, but 3 countries, that could be different.
And Peter, what do you say when it comes to all this?
I think the union, the question of the union and the future of the United Kingdom, I think will become an issue again in the back of these elections. I think we will see nationalist parties, they are going to do well. I would reiterate as well, both Tim and Lesley said, I think the Gaza war is more the factor than the Iran war. Already we saw at the last general election, we saw independent Muslim voices, independent Muslim MPs doing well. We saw very senior Labour figures really struggling to retain their seats in heavily Muslim areas. The Green Party is picking up a lot of that vote as the most vocally anti-war party. They did very well in the Gorton and Denton by-election. Again, a large Muslim population constituency on the back of that. That is a real issue. The challenge actually for the Labour Party is less what the Iran war is doing to its chances now. It's what it does to its chances into the future. Because really what the Labour Party has been running on is a kind of strategy of, look, the first few years are going to be tough, but give us time to bed in our strategy. We will see growth. We're not expecting growth in the first couple of years, but come to years 4 and 5, we're running into the next general election. The economy will turn around. People will feel better. People will feel richer. And there was some actually little green shoots in the last couple of months. Some bits of economic data suggested that might actually be happening. They are all getting absolutely, that's been turned around completely by the Iran war. We're not feeling the full effects of the oil price spike yet. We're not feeling the full effects of the reality of shipments being stuck out in the Strait of Hormuz and around the country. That is probably going to get worse. We're now predicting things like rate cuts that are expected are not going to happen. We might see rate rises. So the economic situation in the country is actually likely to get worse rather than better, and that's going to be a real challenge for the Labour Party.
Tim, you heard Peter there talking about possible projections going forward for the future. Let me ask you, we only have a couple of minutes left, but based on what you're seeing thus far, would you feel safe in making any projections when it comes to perhaps the general election in, I believe, 3 years' time?
Well, it is quite a long way away, and normally governments do quite badly in midterm elections, and they would expect to do a little bit better as the election approaches. But as Peter says, the economy doesn't look as if it's going to turn around for Labour. I think it's probably the case that although reform has stalled a bit, they are here to stay, and they've eaten quite a lot of the Conservatives' vote. So I would be very surprised if we get to the next election with a party that looks like it's going to win an overall majority, which then, of course, will raise all sorts of questions during the election campaign and indeed, obviously, afterwards about who is prepared to do a deal with who in order to govern the country. And I think that's something we're going to be increasingly talking about as we move towards that contest.
All right. Well, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the discussion there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Peter Geoghegan, Lesley Riddoch, and Tim Bale. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.